the old school lifts have stood the test of time. Your squat, bench, deadlift. Why do these remain even when there's all these new exercises that come out?
I love that question. And, it's funny because so many people, as we were discussing a little bit on before we hit record, so many people today look at all these new ways to get things done, right? And if we look at just the history of how things have always been done, if we go back far enough when there really wasn't many options, if we look at originally how people got big and strong, we look at guys lifting just barbells and dumbbells, very basic exercises. And if you look at the results that those things produced, there's nothing missing from what those exercises could have produced. So they were just as good back then as they are today, right? Now, that's not to say that there aren't new options available that are very effective. But what I think a lot of people miss is the fact that the basics still work. Right. And I'm someone who always likes to look at things as simplified as possible. I like to take the most simple approach to get the maximum results. And if there's a case where somebody needs to grow their legs and a squat is an effective exercise for them, there's no need to make it more complicated than that. And I think a lot of people today like to go the more complicated route, sometimes maybe because it could be potentially easier. And sometimes people avoid the hard things. But a lot of times the most straightforward approach is usually the best way to go about it.
That was my thought exactly. It's often a way of just, oh yeah, this is a fun new way to do it, but it's just not as hard as that bench, squat, deadlift. Another aspect is with the advent of modern gyms, we've got so many options now, machines, all these different pieces of equipment. It used to be just a barbell. Now you've got an SSB, you've got a cambered bar, you've got the trap bar. You could just have an unlimited number of variations. And almost seems as if this plethora of options that we have makes us kind of dance around, play with all these different exercises instead of just getting better at the basics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's so many examples in life where when you have so many options, it makes people too indecisive and less likely to stick or pick something just to make a simple decision, right? And, not only with myself and my own training, but as a coach to other clients looking to, get bigger and stronger, we have to sit down and assess what type of exercises will be the best option for a given body part or a training split or things like that. And when you start to narrow things down and you really get very specific with it, you realize that sticking to a few basic exercises is always going to be better than having 1,000 options to play with, and, somebody that might have access, I train clients that train at home with limited equipment. There's also clients that have, access to some of the best machines and hundreds of exercises in a gym. But regardless, the results are going to come from a few key movements. So when there's too many options, I always like to try to steer people in the direction and say, okay, listen, we have more options to pick from, but we really need to narrow it down. And I say that most guys that struggle to get results are ones that just jump around way too much with too many exercises. And I always like to say too, if you trained in an atmosphere and environment where you only had a few exercises to work with, you're going to get very good at those movements and you're going to make great progress on those exercises. And sometimes that's a case where that's actually a benefit. I mean, when I first started training, I didn't have access to so many machines. Most of the gyms that I trained at were very, very bare bones. And I think that's also one of the reasons why I'm so adamant about training that way, is because that got me such great results. But the fact is I didn't have many options. And I think that worked to my advantage.
100%. I can relate to that as well because my background's in calisthenics. You're progressing your weighted dip as well as your weighted pull-up. You've essentially got those two primary compounds. And honestly, the physique that you can build with those movements, if you're going really heavy, train them to failure, recovering, progressing, it can make your physique look like a freak, especially naturally. And I mean, that's all I had when I first started for the 3 to 5 years that I was working out at home. I had a dip station with a dip belt. And I don't mean to toot my own horn, but compared to the average gym goer, I had a pretty good physique without even having all these other options.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I love about calisthenics too. So many people get great results from calisthenics, and a lot of times people like to look at things and ask, okay, why is this working, right? And a lot of times, like if you look at something like calisthenics, I think one of the main reasons it works so well is, again, you don't have thousands of options. You're kind of forced to get very good at a few specific things. And specificity is everything, So if you're really just focusing on dips, focusing on chins, things like that, you're going to get very good at them quickly. And, that progression that you make over time is going to result in strength and size very quickly. So I think that's one of the main things why, calisthenics athletes get such great results. It's not necessarily that the calisthenics have anything advantageous over maybe another form. They're great movements, don't get me wrong. They're staples in my training as well. And there's many very good benefits, but I think the one benefit that people overlook is the fact that, okay, you're limited with your exercise selection, so you're going to get very good at those movements.
For people that understand that you've got to get good at these basics, if you've been training for several years, it can get a bit stale. You're doing the exact same type of exercise. You're making good gains, but motivation and having fun is an important aspect too. How do you introduce some variety into those movements to make them stimulative?
Yeah, that's huge because it's really a big thing, as you mentioned too. You have to keep it fun. You have to keep it interesting. And I think that the best training plan is always going to come down to one that somebody enjoys doing. We could talk, all day about, making things optimal, and there's better ways to get things done. But just from my experience in years and years of doing this, I've seen so many people get great results doing things differently. And it's not that one method is always better than the other. I've seen people get great results doing things that could be quote unquote suboptimal, but because they enjoyed it so much, they're super consistent with it for long periods of time. And that's the key. Any exercise routine that you can do with a high level of effort and a high level of consistency over time is going to produce great results. So that's going to be number one. For myself personally, I've always loved training. I've always had a passion from it from day one. Just the fact that I'm able to train is my most, enjoyable part of my day. You know what I mean? It's always been something that I just enjoy doing. But over the years, I'm a very progress driven individual. I just simply enjoy seeing progression one way or the other. If I add a rep, if I add 5 pounds to the bar. So I'm always doing things with progress in mind. And that kind of keeps me focused on the long game as well too, because especially the longer we do this, we're not expecting to make huge leaps of progress like we first maybe would have gotten the first few years of training. It's a slow grind at this point. But if I at this point add, in a year, 5 pounds to an exercise that I've been progressing on for years and years and years, I'm happy with that. And to me, that makes that whole year of training worth it. So for me, looking at, what type of progress I can make long term and then having little mini goals along the way and little mini wins, that keeps me enjoying the process. It keeps me motivated. And, if I always can tell myself there's 5 more pounds to add to the bar or another rep, that's going to keep me motivated. And I think a lot of times people place limits on themselves too. And that's not necessarily, that's one of the things that could hold people back because, if we're talking about how much can you naturally gain, how strong can you get long-term, people put these limits on themselves. And I think that demotivates them very quickly. And I've always looked at it as, I don't know what I can do, but I want to try and get as far as I can and see what happens. So I'm always looking to progress.
Having that almost delusional optimism and just such self-belief and confidence in yourself is absolutely required, especially when you get to the higher levels, because we're shifting some heavy weight. These workouts we're about to do make us nervous. If you're training properly, you're going to be a bit anxious before a heavy leg day, or you're trying to set some PR on a low rep range, heavy compound lift. And it's just that optimism is so much better than, I don't want to push myself too hard. What happens if I get too much fatigue and I can't recover? Like, it's embracing that difficult is absolutely essential for having that progress mindset.
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing that sets a lot of guys back today. I think I'm not really sure. It's one thing I've never been able to quite understand. I feel like the younger generation today, just for whatever reason, sets a lot of limits on themselves. And I think that also, social media definitely has changed the game. When I first started training, I learned my information on like bodybuilding.com articles, and it was like you'd have to sit there and read. You didn't have, you had your own opinion based on what type of information you gained online. And now today we're listening to everybody else's opinion. And it's very easy when there's a crowd of people saying, oh, you can't achieve this. Oh, you have to be realistic. And when there's so much overwhelming information going around, it's very easy for people to look at and say, okay, maybe I shouldn't even bother pushing myself to see what can happen. So I think that that's definitely been a challenge for a lot of guys today. And what I've seen over the years is just the more and more people look to other people's opinion, they set these limitations on themselves that weren't necessarily their own. And I think that that's one advantage I had starting out, was just my interaction, my information on fitness was so limited that it was just up to me to kind of figure it out for myself.
And you would have had a few case studies of elite performers that you could look up to, and then that helps to raise your own bar of what is possible. Because I first started training in 2009, so 17 years old, and I'm about to turn 33. And honestly, if I didn't see what was possible online, there is no way in my own backyard I would have thought, I'm going to do 4 plates on the dip, 4 plates on the pull-up. But it's just to highlight that what you consume, who you hang around with, will raise or lower your standards.
Absolutely. And I mean, I remember, I joined the gym the first time. My brother introduced me to weight training when I was 14. And he was a wrestler, and he was already pretty strong. So I just assumed that the level of strength he had was, that was just what was expected. And then he introduced me to the bigger guys in the gym, the stronger guys. And I remember within the first month of being in the gym, I witnessed, a guy who can bench press 405 pounds, 4 plates on the bar. And, coming in there at 14 years old, okay, there's a big guy in the gym benching 4 plates. You just naturally assume at one point, if I train long enough, I'm going to hit 4 plates. And I'll tell you what, I've never benched 4 plates in my life. But it never occurred to me that was completely out of reach. I've gotten pretty close. I think I've gotten over about 385, but there was never a doubt in my mind where that wasn't physically possible, and I think a lot of guys will look at that today and just say, something's going on there. That's not something I'm going to achieve.
Yeah, it's different now. We've got so much information where you'd be thinking, oh, maybe I'm not genetically predisposed to reaching that level of strength. Look at my anthropometry with my limb length. I'm not a good bench presser. You put all these limits on yourself instead of just being like, I'm Peter, I'm Daniel, I'm going to do the best with what I got. Let's see where it takes me.
Absolutely.
What are the core training principles from this old school lifting basic mentality that are still important to you to this day?
Yeah, so I mean, to sum it up pretty basically, it's just basic exercises, key compound lifts that you're able to drive for long-term progression. And, progressive overload is still king, and today it's funny because when you really dive deep into the science-based community and, a lot of, I hate to say science-based community because there's a lot of people that claim to be promoting science-based training, but a lot of it is more just overcomplicated training, I like to call it, which definitely it has some methods rooted in science, but they're just taking it so far off the deep end. It's kind of hard to call it science-based training anymore.
As in isolating it to such a small, okay, if you do X for this specific thing, it's going to help everything.
Exactly. And you know what? They might be talking about things that will potentially get you a 5% advantage over something else, but you're skipping over the other 95%. And that's really kind of the root of the old school training methods that I've always really been about myself. And that's focusing on the things that are going to be, kind of the biggest levers to pull. And one example I always like to give in this scenario when we talk about this is if I take a young guy, and I always like to kind of use young guys as an example because, again, I started training when I was 14. And if you were to see a picture of me then versus a picture of me at my best now, obviously there's a ton of time in between that. But what you're going to see is a lot of progression made in muscle mass and strength over time. And if I were to take somebody else in that same situation and say, let's try to get them there faster than it took me, the fastest way possible, what am I going to do? it's not going to be one of these 5% methods that's going to be an overcomplicated thing. If I say, okay, let's isolate a specific body part. If, this skinny kid comes to me and he's 150 pounds and we want to get him up to 180, 200 pounds. Let's say, what's the quickest way we're going to do that? Let's start with one body part. Okay, we need to add more mass to his chest. If he can bench press effectively, it's a comfortable exercise for him. He doesn't have any injuries, things like that. And now let's just say he's naturally benching, 105 pounds, maybe the first couple months of lifting. What's the fastest way we're going to pack on some size to his chest? Let's get that bench press up to 1 plate, 2 plate, 3 plates, as far as we can get him, right? And when it comes down to exercise selection, I like to look at exercises that way. What's the potential for long-term progression of this movement? Again, it's not unheard of for somebody after a few years of lifting to go from a 1 plate squat to a 2, 3, 4 plate squat, right? And that's going to be, in my opinion, the quickest way to add mass to the legs, right? Those exercises that have the best long-term potential for progression are going to be the staples. Now, I think a lot of people miss that concept when they start talking about advanced movements and things like that, because a lot of times people will really dial in, this exercise might be better than a bench press because now we could train the upper pecs at a certain angle and it's going to hit specific fibers. And you're not necessarily wrong. But what people need to look at is, okay, and ask themselves, let's say 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, if you're still doing that exercise, what type of long-term potential do you have for progression in that movement? Because if you're just doing the same movement over and over again for the next 5 years with no progression, there's going to be no adaptation, right? So it might be hitting the body part the way you want it to. But if in 5 years from now, I've moved my bench press up from 1 plate to 3 plates, who's going to build a bigger chest? So it's not to say that other exercise is not a good addition to your training program, but you need the meat and potatoes there to really see that progress.
With your idea of progressive overload and keeping it simple for the goal of hypertrophy, how would you look at it? Is it about adding sets? Is it adding reps? My guess, if I was to throw it out there, Peter, is it's about going heavier for a certain rep range.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that could look a little bit different depending on where somebody is in their lifting journey. Somebody first starting out, some of the very simplified basic routines, even like 5x5 is an excellent way to go about it. There's the advantages of, doing multiple sets of 5. You're building that skill and that technique, which is very beneficial early on. We want lifters to develop good technique and skill because that's going to set them up to make the most progress long term. Once somebody becomes a bit more efficient at the exercise, we don't necessarily need to hammer it with as much volume. We just need to have as much progress as possible within the volume that they need to train with. So that could be, at this stage in the game, I only need to realistically do 1 to 2 heavy sets of a movement in each session to continue making progress because I'm so efficient at that lift. If I try to take somebody who's just started training, they haven't spent that much time developing the skill on the lift. 1 or 2 sets could definitely work, but they're also going to develop their skill faster by doing a few extra sets. So I have a bit of a volume window that I like to work with most people. But the key is once somebody becomes efficient at a movement, I'd rather them do less sets and add weight, add reps over time, rather than doing additional sets, because additional sets past a certain point, it's just going to add more fatigue. And the key is let's move those numbers up. And I always use this example as well too. If you take 2 guys, let's say they're identical twins, and you put one of them on a program where he's doing low volume, one of them, putting them on a program that does high volume. But at the end of the day, we get them from a 1 plate bench to a 2 plate bench in whatever time frame. Do you realistically think there's going to be, much of a difference in their development of their pecs? You know what I mean? So the question is, which one of those methods gets you there faster and more efficient? That's really going to be the best way to go about it.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because there's a certain amount of sets that is good, but you can't say this amount of sets for everyone. Beginners probably benefit from more sets to get more movement mastery over the exercise, more total reps in. But for someone that's more intermediate to advanced, starting to add more of those sets, 4th set to a heavy bench press, I just have to question the level of intensity that's coming on those first 3 sets. And I had this realization as well myself, because we will do anything to get away from the hard work. If I have 3 sets programmed and I'm trying to make progress by going heavier, the easier alternative sometimes, put on a fourth set, put on a fifth set, but you tend to get into that junk volume over time. And yeah, I've had some criticism from some comments saying that, oh, your work capacity is not good. You could add more sets. But then I'm thinking to myself, man, I'm making progress on paper, and I can only really recover from these sets when I'm training at this intensity.
Yeah, and that's an argument I hear a lot as well too. With a lot of these volume recommendations that people speak about today, especially even for more advanced guys, in very few cases does it make sense to just continually keep increasing volume, especially for somebody that's already very strong. And a lot of these recommendations that I hear from people, I've never actually seen done effectively in real life ever. Maybe somebody that's extremely new to the gym and they're just not training very intensely. There's also a difference between, and not many people talk about this as well, somebody's relative strength could be very significant in the terms of volume needed. And what I mean by that is, if I say, okay, you're going to do 3 sets of 5, with maybe your 7 rep max, for somebody that their 7 rep max is 135 pounds, the amount of fatigue that's going to generate is very different than somebody's whose 7 rep max is 300, 400, 500 pounds. So those volume recommendations should not be, general across the board like that. It's very different depending on your strength levels.
We've spoken a lot about training intensity with the previous topic there. What does training hard actually mean to you on a sustainable, consistent basis?
Yeah, I like that you mentioned, we get to these places where training can actually be, you could get nervous training the way you do when, you have certain things. I'm not sure about you, but I'm very meticulous with keeping a logbook and things like that. And I think that that's one of the things that keeps you very honest with your training. It's very easy for, and this is very common today. A lot of guys will just kind of go in the gym with no plan, and they just base their training on emotion and how they feel that day. And it's easy to go in and say, yeah, I trained hard. And maybe you did push yourself. But if you really didn't challenge your body to a new stimulus or to at least whatever you're capable of doing that day, then there's no true marker for how hard you actually trained. It's just based on emotion at that point. And, I'm a very logical person with a lot of things in life. And with lifting, I always have to have a reason for doing what I'm doing. Like, very rarely will I be in the gym doing an exercise, a set, or even additional rep without a reason for it. And I think that when you're actually tracking things like that, you kind of force yourself to train hard. And I think that, training hard comes down to doing what you actually have to do rather than what just feels right in the moment. Because it's very easy for us to get emotional, like I said, in the gym. It's like if I went in with no logbook and I said, I'm just going to train hard today, and I thought I trained hard, if I wrote down what I did and I based it off of what actual hard training is in my book, it might look very different.
Because we've all got a bias in our own mind. We are not going to go day to day, especially as men, thinking, I didn't work hard. I just, kind of went through the motions. Even if we did, we're going to think, yeah, that was a killer workout. But for me, keeping that logbook helps me from not underdoing it, but actually overdoing it. Because left to my own devices, I'm going to want to train as hard as I possibly can all the time. And if I didn't have it written down, I'm just going to get super aroused and just fired up to smash my sets. Whereas now, as you get more advanced, it's about how much progress can I make for 6 weeks. I could go really hard today, but I know it's going to cook me for the next workout. So it's not just for people underworking, it's also for people overworking too.
Absolutely. And that's something that I think any lifter over a certain period of time will eventually come to experience for themselves too. It's kind of like a textbook sign of a newbie or intermediate lifter when you can tell that they're not training with the next session in mind. And that's a big thing for long-term progress. In the beginning, a lot of times you can get away with it. Again, when I talk about relative strength and things like that, newbie lifters might not have to think so much about what am I going to do next week just yet, because the recovery ability based on the weights and the intensity you're training with can probably handle what you're doing. But a lot of guys will kind of train that way when they first start lifting, and they say, okay, I just train all out every session, and I'm making progress. But then once they start getting relatively strong and lifting, pretty substantial weights, a lot of times they end up finding themselves with a rude awakening where all of a sudden now they come in the gym the next week and they're weaker. They're like, I don't know what happened. I was able to lift this last week. I can't even do one rep with it today. And that's kind of like a lesson that I think everybody goes through at a certain point in time. And, that logbook, like you mentioned, kind of keeps you from doing that. And I think that that's, again, as you mentioned, one of the huge benefits of having something like a logbook. Because without it, I would probably not be able to train consistently because I just naturally train harder than I need to. And, training harder than you need to is not necessarily a smart approach. It sounds hardcore. And a lot of times, if you go into an average gym and you get amped up on the bench press and you got a spotter behind you and he says, oh man, you should have went for one more. Maybe I could have got one more, but that might not necessarily be the best for progress as far as what I'm going to be doing in my next sessions, So, that's a telltale sign of somebody that's a seasoned lifter that kind of understands when they need to push it and when they need to pull back.
Another pro tip to keep yourself accountable and also objective, in addition to the logbook, is filming some of your sets. Because you could write on paper, I'm doing 3 sets of 5 when my weight at this exercise, I could lift 7 reps. But then you actually film it and your rep speed hasn't even slowed down. So objectively, that means that we're not even edging towards muscular failure. So that's what keeps me really honest as well as the logbook.
Yeah. I mean, I like data. It doesn't lie, and that's the thing too. With anybody that loves training, like I mentioned, it's a huge passion of mine. It's very easy to get away from that. And that's what keeps you grounded when you actually have that proof and you could look back at it.
With old school lifts, we've talked a lot about free weights, barbells, dumbbells, but machines, they definitely have their place. How do you put them into your routine?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I like to say as a general rule of thumb, and again, as I mentioned, kind of with the volume recommendations and things like that, it really depends on where a lifter is in their lifting career. At different phases of, I've been doing this for over 20 years. How I train now obviously is very different than when I first started lifting, and that also comes down to kind of the amount of free weights I do and machines. But as a general rule of thumb, I think that anybody that could utilize free weights, they shouldn't shy away from them. Number one, they should always be the base of the plan. They're going to teach the body to move as a single unit. And I think a lot of people that kind of skip over these basic lifts make the argument, things like maybe a barbell row. They'll argue, oh, but if I'm doing this for my upper back, my lower back is the weak link, and I'm trying to train the upper back, so I should be using something like a chest supported row. And there's an argument for that. If you're trying to isolate and target the upper back a bit more, a chest supported row is going to have some of its advantages. But what I do see is when people completely skip over the free weight movements, at least as far as building the foundation, their body's going to have a lot of weak links. And that sets you up for a lot of things to not really work very well down the line, as far as strength levels. Even if your goal is just specifically to build muscle mass, you're gonna see, and like some of the best bodybuilders in the world that have complete physiques are also very strong at that, some of the foundational movements. So I always like the foundational movements, the free weight exercises to kind of be the base. Now, when we need to get hyper specific and target specific body parts, machines are huge for, having an advantage for being able to isolate and target things. Now, something like, like I said, like the upper back, if you have a weaker upper back, and you need to target that a bit more, doing something like a chest supported row has its place. But, somebody that's also very strong in a barbell row is generally going to have a lot of muscle mass. So again, I like to use it more as, the specifics, and, the meat and potatoes is going to be, your free weight movements. As a general rule of thumb, I would say probably in my training, maybe 75, 80% of it is going to be free weights. And then the rest we're going to kind of fill in with machines.
That's exactly how I like to do it as well, because there's just something about that simple progressive overload from the free weight compounds. Because I don't know about you, Peter, but I've got multiple gym memberships. I like to keep it interesting. And the downside of that is different machines, different resistance, hard to progressively overload. Whereas a barbell, for the most part, is a barbell. dumbbells, same type of thing. That's one of the perks of it. But I think if you were to do only barbells, you're missing out from some of that extra work that you can get in with machines, particularly for certain body parts. Like you're not going to hit the hamstrings, bicep femoris muscle with any type of hinge exercise that you can do at the gym. You're going to have to do a leg curl machine. But for me, I particularly like putting machines at the end after I've done, say, 2 free weight compound exercises or a calisthenics movement, finishing with a machine, be it a compound or an isolation, just to gain a bit more of that stimulus without having to do even more stability after you've done 2 heavy compounds to start with.
Absolutely. And, I was about to touch on that as well. I agree 100% on that. And that's generally the way I like to program it as well. If I'm training a body part with, let's say there's a few exercises that day for that muscle group, starting with the free weight movements, taking advantage of it when you're strongest, is definitely going to have all the benefits that you're going to get out of that free weight movement. Now, if you need to train that body part with a bit more volume, if you need to add a bit more sets or additional exercises, the machines naturally fit very well as the supplemental movement afterwards. Especially again, if you've already worked kind of those stabilizer muscles, they're a bit more fatigued and you want to target that muscle further. A machine is going to be a bit less taxing as well. So you can add those in a fatigued state. It's very difficult to do the opposite, where if I told you, okay, you're going to do a bunch of leg exercises and you're going to finish with your barbell squats, you're not going to get as much out of that movement at that point. You're not going to be as strong. The stabilizer muscles are not necessarily going to be handle, the same loads they would while they're fresh. But that's where at the end of the session, the end of training that body part that day, just going into an exercise or movement that has the stability kind of built in will allow you to do a few more sets for that muscle group, definitely with the safety built in as well.
What's refreshing is hard work is rewarded. If you get strong on the free weight compounds, you'll be able to go onto the machines with a couple of workouts. You'll figure out the exercise technique and whatnot and be able to smash it because you've got that requisite stability, strength in the major movement patterns, and you've got the raw horsepower with your muscle mass. Whereas if, extreme example, all you do is machines, you're going to go onto those free weight movements and you're going to feel like a deer that's just been born, just all shaky, really weak as well.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, as we've spoken about, like over the years, I've always based most of my training on free weight movements. And like you mentioned, having different gym memberships, I've gone to other gyms where there's a new chest machine and I would love to try it. And I've never used it before. And I'll jump on that machine and I'll be training with people there that have used the machine all the time. And they'll say, wow, you're really strong on this machine. You're using like double the weight I am. And, I tell them that strength is not from using this machine because I've never used this specific machine before. It's from the free weights and, the strength that carries over from it. And as you mentioned, if you're on those machines all day and you're never touching those free weights, you're not going to have the same strength carryover. So it's one of those things where you're just getting so many advantages to doing the free weights. It's very hard to skip them if you don't have a good enough reason to do so.
Why do people skip them though? Because I see all the best physiques, all the strongest people, they train with free weight compounds for the most part. But then I just wish there was a pill that I could give the average person. Just take away all this complexity, just get rid of all these options. What do you think is missing for people that aren't doing the free weights?
Yeah, I think as we mentioned, it's just so many options. And I think it's easy for people to start to think that new is better, right? With so many things in life, over the years, and it's an argument many people have for using machines too. They say, they used to do it that way. It doesn't mean it was better. There was many examples in history where we thought this was the best. And as we've grown as a society, we've gotten more knowledge, we've gotten smarter, we've created better ways to do things. In my opinion, weight training has not evolved in that light where we really have a revolutionary new way of doing things. It's in my opinion, one of the things that has kind of remained pretty stable over the years, where I haven't seen a clear-cut argument for the way things people did them even back in the 50s and 60s. Was ineffective in terms compared to what we do today. So it's one of those things where it's just always worked. And I think people are always looking for new ways to make things better. But it's one of those things where you're better off just, coming to that conclusion that there is no better way to get it done. this is the best way to do it. Let's just do it, and that usually comes back to the hard work. A lot of times people will look for ways to kind of take a magic pill or to excel faster and avoid that hard work. But the truth is the fastest way to get there is just to embrace that hard path. Right. And I think that if more people did that in training, we'd see people making progress a lot faster, and, we'd see less people, trying to reinvent the wheel.
Breaking news. The biggest fitness FAQ sale of the year is now live. Get 50% off all our calisthenics programs with the code BLACK50 at checkout. Wait, 50%? I meant 5. Someone's getting fired.
It seems as if in modern fitness and this next generation, one of the values that is missing is hard work. But it seems as if every generation thinks the one before doesn't work as hard as they did. But if I just look at workouts from 30 years ago, how they were training, not a lot of complaining, a lot of head down, consistency, dedication, a progress mindset, a growth mindset. Whereas I look online and it can be a very toxic, pessimistic way of looking at things.
Yeah, it's funny. I love that you mentioned that too, because, I was just thinking about this as we were discussing it too. It's like I could look back and remember a time where the older generation would say, oh, you kids are soft, and it's true. I feel that way about the younger generation now. It's just a natural thing that happens. But I think that the real change, especially, from the older generation to my generation, I don't think was that different compared to the new generation now. And like I said, I think social media is a big reason for that. But the big difference I see, as you mentioned too, as well, there used to just be a real enjoyment for hard work. Hard work it's hard to explain this to the newer generation because it sounds like to them, oh, why would you want to work hard if you don't have to? But there was just always this enjoyment with, training as hard as you can. I would get together with my friends at the gym and we would literally just continuously see who can outdo the next person. And it didn't matter who actually was the hardest worker. It was the enjoyment of all trying to push each other to train as hard as possible. We used to do leg workouts where we'd say, okay, listen, let's see who pukes first. I've never heard the younger generation say that, you know what I mean? And that, I think just that atmosphere and that mentality kind of shaped, how our generation kind of came up lifting. And I think that that's really what's missing, this appreciation for the hard work. And, when you see the results that you put in for the hard work, it makes it very easy to want to keep doing it. And I think a lot of people never actually go through that period of time where they really put in the hard work and they saw the results. And I think once you see it, it's pretty undeniable.
You nailed it there. I agree. There has to be that buy-in period where you're rewarded for your effort. And I always say this to people, it's not about how strong you are or how big you are. It sounds cliche, but it's the effort you put in. Because if I'm working out and I'm working out with someone that's on my level, physique, strength, and they're going through the motions, they're working at like a 5 out of 10. Honestly, that doesn't impress me. I'm not happy with that. Whereas if I'm working out with someone that's been training for about a year and they're using less weight, but they're genuinely, you can tell they're genuinely pushing themselves at an honest level, that gets me fired up more than anything.
100%. Yeah. It doesn't matter how strong you are. It doesn't matter how advanced you are. That level of effort is just always what's going to be the thing that's going to get you results. And it's always going to be the thing that rubs off on the people around you. And that's really where, certain gyms and atmospheres have good vibes and good energies. And that's always kind of the gym atmosphere I've always gravitated towards.
Me too.
It's just, you can walk in a gym and you can tell everybody in here is training hard.
That's same for me with my multiple gym memberships. I'm going to name one of them, Anytime Fitness. Beautiful facility, great lighting, good air conditioning, clean equipment. The intensity of the average patron is questionable. It's like you're working out in your living room. And then I go to this dirty warehouse gym that costs a few $100s a year for a membership, free weights. Some of the machines don't even work, but there's meatheads in there. It smells like shit. I don't give a crap, man. It's just the atmosphere is sick.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you're in that environment, it's impossible not to work hard. I
know that you work out at home a fair bit of the time, don't you, Peter? How How do you cultivate that mindset yourself? Because you don't have that external stimulus.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great thing because as you mentioned, I train at home primarily. It really depends on the time of the year too, as well, and what things, are going on in my life. But I also have roughly two gym memberships on top of my home gym. So I kind of shuffle around 3 different places to train. But yeah, I mean, I get the same type of training in whether I'm at home or whether I'm at the gym. I definitely feed off of the environment in the gym, but I'm naturally a very introverted person. So I am very, very in my own head when I train. And, it's funny because we're talking about the logbook and things like that. I actually have to be careful not to take myself too far, especially when I'm in my own head, because I could take myself to places where I could get overly emotional in my training. I could look at a number in a logbook, and if I miss it, it could ruin my day. And that's the stuff that I don't really like to tell people about, because also it could make people look at things like the logbook in a bad light and say, okay, I don't want to obsess over it, which you really shouldn't. You have to be very level-headed with it. But somebody like me, when I train alone, it's so easy for me to just put my headphones on, kind of lock in, and just get myself fired up. I know how to get myself in the zone in pretty much any atmosphere. Obviously, in a great gym setting with guys around me that are also, in that same headspace, it's very easy to do it. But I could lock in pretty much anywhere and do it. I just enjoy it. I know myself so well on an emotional level too, that no matter what's going on in my day, I could pretty much use anything to fuel my energy for where I need it to be. But like I said, sometimes it could be a challenge to pull back as well.
Can you talk more about that? Because I'm sure it's an issue that many people have, which is you got a logbook, you can't beat your number on that day, no matter how hyped up you get. Dealing with that mentally, how do you like to get perspective on that when you've plateaued?
Yeah, it's tough because I think experience plays a big role in it. I think a lot of guys have to experience it over long periods of time to really, especially if they're obsessive about hitting numbers and things like that, you have to see, when you get frustrated and things don't go the way you want them to, you have to see over time, things balance out. And I think that, at this stage in the game for me, I'm much more mature in this sense that I know, okay, if I did 6 reps last week and that's kind of my standard, and today my strength just wasn't there and I only managed 5, it doesn't mean things fell apart and I need to reapproach and reevaluate my whole training approach. It just means on this specific day, my strength might not have been there. Maybe I had a little bit less sleep. Maybe I had a little bit more stress that day. Maybe my nutrition was off slightly. But if I'm seeing those trends still go up over the weeks, the months, and even the year, that one session doesn't mean anything, right? In terms of the long-term progress. Now, I think that that's also when we talk about programming and talk about the logbook, it's very important to not just look at things session to session, but to look at things long term. And at this stage in the game, like I mentioned, if I add 5 pounds to a lift that I've been progressing on for years and years, I'll consider that a win. But I also am aware that at this stage of the game, it might take that long to see that type of progress. If somebody's more of a newbie lifter, more intermediate, they could see much more rapid growth than that. And their expectations should be a bit different, but it's having that expectation, that realistic expectation of what is my strength going to look like? What is my performance going to look like over the course of weeks, months, and years, and not just one session.
It's refreshing to hear someone that's advanced speak that way, because online, progressive overload. There can be a misconception that has to happen all the time. And then for me, I'm also looking at the same thing. Is this an acute problem or a chronic problem? If it's just one workout, it's par for the course. As you said, recovery, nutrition, so many variables which could impact that. But if it's something that's happening, say for 3 or 4 weeks and I haven't progressed, then it's worth taking stock. This is something I've been a little bit more gentle on myself in previous years, because I'm not a competitive athlete. I don't have an end date for any type of event, which is a blessing and a curse, because on the one hand, one workout doesn't matter, but you got to be careful, because that type of mindset, if that happens for a few weeks, you got to check yourself.
Absolutely.
How do you know when a program stopped working though? Because you could keep pushing, but if you're not able to lift heavier or you're not seeing any meaningful adaptations in your muscle mass, how do you look at the signs and symptoms of that?
That's a great question, because we can see plateaus occur for a lot of different reasons, and sometimes just simply fixing a plateau might be that we need to recover a bit more as well. So a lot of times people will look at something, especially in the logbook, and they'll say, oh, my strength's not going up, or I've been kind of even regressing a little bit, or just been at a plateau for long periods of time. And a lot of times what's going on is the stimulus is there. You're just under recovering. And a lot of times, you're just simply building too much fatigue with that stimulus, and you need time for your body to actually adapt to it. So most of the times when I've run into these issues where I might potentially for a short period of time think that a program might need to be adjusted, a lot of times all I simply need is a bit more rest. And, I've been talking about this a bit more recently, and I actually have some more content that I am going to actually touch on this a bit more coming out. But a lot of times for guys that train very hard and they always think that they need to add more to the program, a lot of times it's actually, the one thing that's going to get you to the next level is not doing more, but simply just taking more rest, and if you're training hard enough, a lot of guys are at that stage where when they're intermediate advanced, more rest is actually going to be more beneficial than more training in a lot of cases. So what I like to do is assess first, okay, if we simply just rest a bit more, do we see progress start to return? And if progress starts to return, then we know, okay, the program is working. We just need more rest there. And that's kind of like the main thing I like to look at with a program. Now, if we rest and you're still not seeing any type of results that you think you should be getting at that stage, then we need to look at the program and reevaluate and say, okay, maybe something's going on. We're not training enough. We're not, producing enough stimulus. Maybe we're not training hard enough. But that's usually the second thing I'll look at. First is usually recovery.
With reaching your potential and making progress beyond the beginner stages, it is a fine line between just beating yourself on the back as hard as you can, but also having that restraint. And it's those people that can have that disciplined focus and when it's time to push, know when it's time to recover. They're the ones that get ahead.
Yeah. So much of lifting and training, it's mental, right? Like being able to push yourself, but also being able to hold back. It's a very difficult thing for guys that enjoy doing it. And that really requires a lot of discipline. I mean, for me, one of the hardest things to do is not go to the gym or to train. It's to take a day off when I want to train. Because there's days where I know I need the rest, but I want to train, and I have to practice self-control by not going into the gym and pushing it further. And I think that's a challenge for a lot of guys too. It's very easy. I've made this joke before, a lot of people like to, say, no days off, and it's going to sound hardcore, but in my opinion, it's more hardcore to be able to take a day off than to push, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that is absolute facts. And just expecting yourself to say, I'm not going to the gym and not going to the gym, it's not going to happen. You really have to have a replacement activity for that. That is really going to fill that void. And an extreme example of that would be just taking a holiday, like over the weekend. It's that forced rest where you're out of routine, the habit's completely different, and you'll take that. The real challenge is when you're at home, normal routine, work week. What do you do if you're going to take an extra 2 days off the gym?
It's going to feel like the longest 2 days of your life. Yeah, for sure. You have to fill it with something. Yeah.
What are you going to do is you're going to go on social media, get bombarded with all these exercises, change your routine, and not make as much progress.
Yeah, that's what happens.
This constant variety, though, it's such a trap. And I keep coming back to this because we can think a routine is getting stale, and then we change our routine, we get sore. We think, ooh, okay, I haven't felt my pecs like this in a while because I've changed variations. I think we understand that muscle soreness isn't the best indicator of progress and growth, but why do we sometimes default to thinking if I'm not sore, nothing's happening?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one. I mean, most people will always associate, hard training with soreness, right? And again, I think that comes back to more of an emotional thing. You wake up sore, you're kind of reminded, oh, I definitely trained hard. That soreness didn't come from training easy. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of people get caught up in chasing these external stimuluses, right? Like, okay, if I was sore after workout, did I feel tired after the session? I felt like I did enough. And I think more people need to be really in tune with what's actually, making progress and what's causing those results to happen. And that's, again, why I'm such a fan of the logbook, because you could actually see it. It's on paper. It's not, a maybe. It's cut and dried. I like everything in training to be as clear, cut, and dry as possible. I don't like to assume things. I like proof. That's just me personally. And I think that, when people start to look at factual things like the logbook, it's much easier to determine, did I train hard? Did I do the right thing? Am I on the right path?
I think this is the logic of the average person that maybe doesn't know as much. I want to build muscle. One of the key things I have to do is train close to failure on a muscle group. So if I do that with a different exercise every single time, aren't I accomplishing this? Whereas what you're saying is one of the best ways to know that you're actually building muscle has your actual bench press that you've been neurologically increasing your strength at improve with how much weight you're lifting, plus you're working pretty close to failure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, you're pretty much spot on. A lot of people will look at training like that and say, okay, if I just need to train this body part or muscle group near failure, it doesn't matter if I'm doing a bench press and machine. And then you get people kind of haphazardly training like that. They'll go in the gym. Oh, you know what? The bench press is taken. I'll use this machine. Could be any exercise. But the fact is, for you to actually make progress long term, if you're jumping around on too many different exercises, using too many varieties, you're not actually going to get good at this one thing.
Is it as well about the mechanical tension? You're going to produce more on your heaviest bench press that you're skilled at compared to some random chest exercise.
Absolutely. And that's where skill becomes a very important thing in any aspect of lifting that not a lot of people talk about, especially in bodybuilding or just anybody that wants to build muscle for that matter. The more skilled you become at a lift, the better of an exercise that becomes for you to build muscle long term, because you can grind out reps on that exercise that you wouldn't be able to do if you're not skilled in that movement. And again, that's the big sign. A clear-cut sign of an advanced lifter or somebody who's been doing it very long. If you look at how well they're able to grind out reps near failure, it's very different than looking at, a beginner or an intermediate approach failure on an exercise, especially when it comes to free weights and things like that. I have been training free weights so long and so consistently over the years that I can pretty much take most of my sets to failure or very close to it, even without a spotter. I mean, I'm not recommending that people train that way without a spotter, but I don't need the assistance there because I can grind out those reps. And I'm also so self-aware of when I'm actually going to fail that I know how close I can push it without needing some type of assistance. Now, if you take a beginner and intermediate, it's very common for them to do a rep and then they attempt another one near failure and they just give out halfway through it. And sure, you could say that that's an effort thing, but also a lot of them are just not skilled enough to grind out that additional rep. And that only comes from experience and doing that lift over and over again, throughout the years. And if you build that type of skill on a lift, what doesn't matter what exercise it is, that skill is going to come from doing that lift consistently over time. That lift now becomes more of an effective exercise because you can consistently push it closer to failure over time.
I'd like you to expand on that minimalist style of training that you are embodying. You do a few exercises really well compared to someone that has multiple chest movements in a workout. Just say, example, you're doing 3 exercises in your routine to hit 12 sets for chest, whereas someone else is doing 6. Why do you prefer doing less compared to just filling your workout with a ton of different exercises?
Well, one of the main things, and most people, whether they admit it or not, if you see how this plays out in real life, is we're naturally always leaving a little bit in the tank when we know that we have a lot more to do. And if we don't, what's going to happen is, after we get through 2 or 3 exercises, whatever we do on the back end of that workout is going to be You're just going to be going through the motions at that point, because it's just not physically possible to exert yourself the same way you did when you were fresh earlier in the workout. So when you stack on so many exercises, whether it's for one body part or just multiple exercises within a session, whatever gets placed at the end of the session past a certain point, you're really not getting much benefit out of it just because your level of effort is not there. And that's not a hardcore thing. A lot of times people will say, oh, but I can still train hard 2 hours into the session. I promise you, if you're training hard after, the first few exercises you do, if you were to take those exercises that you placed on the back end of that workout and do them fresh on another day, you'd be amazed at how much stronger and how much effort and intensity you could put into those. So this is just, you can argue whether this is science-based or, bro science or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, just logically, your effort is going to take a dramatic, nosedive after a certain point in the workout. And holding yourself back early in the session to save more for the end never produces the same results as giving the exercises you do early on in the session, full effort and intensity, and then not doing additional exercises that you don't need. And over time, just building that skill with those lifts, again, as I mentioned, rather than trying to build the skill of 6 exercises. If you're building the skill at 3, it's like anything else, in any sport, one athlete, if they were trying to play 3 different positions or 6 different positions, if they focus on that one position, they're going to get better at it, right? If they're trying to practice, if it's, in any case, when you're trying to practice too many things, you're not going to get as good as doing that one thing. So the less you do, the better you get at it, the more you're going to get out of it in this case.
And then practically speaking as well, just time. Warming up for 6 different movements, especially if you're a stronger lifter. After I do 2, I'm cooked. That's taking like 30, 45 minutes just to get through 2 movements.
Absolutely. And that's, again, one thing that changes majorly with, again, your strength levels. Somebody early on in their training, not that it would be better to do it, but they could probably get away with doing more exercises simply because that warm-up time it's minimal at best. But the stronger you get, this is when, I always like to say that a lifter kind of goes through this journey, right? And eventually when they hit this intermediate stage or late intermediate stage, a lot of these things that they never thought about, now these become real things. And, the amount of time that you're in the gym simply due to warm-ups can make or break your programming at that point. A training program that you used to be able to follow as a newbie that might have taken 45 minutes, now because of the warm-up time you need as an intermediate advanced, you might be in there for 2 hours. And that's not something that I'm looking to do if I'm spending, the majority of that time doing warm-ups.
That extends to what workout split you follow beyond just a exercise level in a workout itself. What are the biggest mistakes you see people make concerning workout splits as they do become more advanced?
So I think that the biggest thing is that when people kind of get in the groove with their training and they simply enjoy a training split, they think that it's kind of the end all be all. And a lot of times, like I said, what they could have gotten away with and, based on enjoyment and results early on will no longer serve them later on in their training career. And I mean, for me, I was very big on combining a lot of body parts into my training when I was, beginner, intermediate. I got great results doing that. I simply just enjoyed it. I liked the way it felt to get a pump in my chest, my back, my arms, all in one workout. And I saw great results doing that. But again, now if I were to try doing things like, full body training or even full upper lower training sessions, which are still very productive training programs for people at certain points in their lifting career. At this stage of the game, I'd be spending so much time just warming up that the effort and intensity I'm going to place to these body parts is going to suffer. So even if that's the way I enjoy training, at this stage of the game, I have to train based on what's going to get me the most progress versus what I personally prefer. There's always a balance in there. I still enjoy training no matter what I'm doing. I mean, there's ways to make it more enjoyable for me as well. But I kind of have to put aside what I personally enjoy for what's going to get me the most progress at this stage in the game. And I think a lot of people feel like they kind of figured it out. And the truth is, over time, it's always going to change based on your needs. So there's never this perfect routine that you're going to be able to run forever. I mean, maybe if you want to just maintain after a certain period of time, sure, you could say this routine is my maintenance routine. But if we're talking about making progress, your routine's going to go through phases where it's going to have to change.
Because you can follow just a general push-pull legs type of split or a upper-lower split for a while, make really good progress. But eventually, if you've got bodybuilding goals, there is going to be lagging body parts that require a little bit more love and attention, a bit more volume. Is that where you'd start thinking, okay, what's my needs analysis? How do I structure a week with total number of sets, frequency, etc.?
Yeah, and I think that especially when it comes to bodybuilding, we're talking about specific muscle groups. A lot of people over time will tend to develop the muscle groups that they enjoy training the most, much better than the ones that they don't. Great example is something like legs. A lot of times guys just simply don't enjoy training legs the same way they do upper body. And naturally they even if they train them, they naturally don't have the most developed legs. And if we're taking somebody that's, has aspirations of bodybuilding and we say, okay, we need to develop those legs. Now you're at a place where we're going to have to actually pull back on some of those body parts that might be your strong points, allow you to dedicate more time to the leg training. And now we're going to have to focus again on kind of what needs to be done rather than what you prefer. And that's what it's all about kind of at the advanced stages where we need to pull back on the stuff that might not need as much work simply from a recovery standpoint. That's going to allow us to dedicate more time and effort on these other body parts. I mean, for me, my arms have always been my most developed body part. Like I mentioned, naturally for me too as well, when I first started training, it was one of the most enjoyable body parts to train. At this stage of the game, most of my training for something like arms is pretty much maintenance work at this point. I don't even really necessarily enjoy training them the way I did when I was younger, which is probably a good thing because I'd be spending too much time training arms when I'm trying to develop other body parts. But I think everybody kind of needs to get to that point, especially in the intermediate stages or the advanced stages where they have to start looking at their training that way and ask themselves, okay, is this body part more developed or am I seeing more progress on this exercise because I enjoy doing it more? And I think that a lot of times people think, oh, I just don't have the genetics for this. But when you really look at what you're doing, there's a level of effort and there's a level of enjoyment that you're applying to this exercise or body part that you're not for the other one.
You need to start to derive that same type of enjoyment that you had on those muscles that you do have developed and then the associated exercises with your weak link or body parts you're trying to bring up. Just highlighting what you said earlier, everything in your program, you want to know what you're doing. And the reason why, one of many, people have these weaker body parts, they tend to be put on the end of a workout. I think arms at the end of a session instead of being right at the start. And people don't tend to track it in any meaningful way. Whereas I'm sure if you were trying to bring up your biceps, you're going to know exactly how much you're doing on a standing strict curl. And then you're treating that with the same progressive overload over time that you would other stuff. And then by virtue of lifting heavier, your arms should be getting bigger. Whereas if it's just, I'm just going to do some extra work at the end of a session, you're kind of not going to have that drive and, logic behind your routine to see numbers go up.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And I think arms are a perfect example of that. I mean, I used to routinely get asked I'd walk into a gym and somebody would come up to me and ask, oh, what do you do to develop your arms? It's a common question I still get today. And a lot of times when I tell people, my approach and what they should be doing, they kind of look at me a little bit confused, but then you see, eventually they get it. I say, for biceps, it's a barbell curl and it's a dumbbell curl. And I'm just trying to add as much weight and progress over time the same way I would if I was trying to grow my legs and I was going to squat more, or my chest and I was going to bench more. And most of them, as you mentioned, a lot of times people are struggling with something like, biceps or triceps or any of the smaller muscle groups. They'll just tack them on at the end of the workout. They'll go by the logic of, my arms got trained a lot in my compound lifts. I'll just hit a couple exercises at the end of the session. But again, if you're doing those sets at the end of an exercise where you're kind of already, pre-fatigued, exhausted, the amount of effort, the amount of energy you put into that body part, it's not going to be the same as if you trained it fresh or if you focused on it. It'd be like training your legs and doing squats at the end of a leg session and trying to get up to a very high level of, weight on a barbell squat. You're not going to get to a 4-plate squat by just putting it at the afterthought of a workout. You're going to go in first in the session, and you're going to train that exercise as a priority. And that's the approach I always took on arms from day one. I always said, okay, when I first started training, I struggled to do maybe more than 10 or 12 reps with a standard barbell. Once I was able to curl with pretty decent technique, 115, 125, 135 pounds even, I didn't have small biceps. And there was nothing magical about my routine, my sets, or my volume. It was that simple progression on a basic exercise.
And it's the structure, because I've notoriously done just a push-pull legs type of split with those isolations tacked on at the end. So I can speak to that. Whereas last year, for the whole year, I had a upper body session, and then the next day I did arms and shoulders. And I've never done that before because I've always just prioritized the compounds, and definitely noticed an improvement in biceps, triceps, lateral delts, because I was actually legitimately doing them. Like the amount of effort you can put in when it's on its own day. Plus, it's really fun. I really enjoyed that experiment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if more people kind of looked at everything like that, they'll kind of understand how simple training really can be. It's all about just prioritizing the things that need the most attention. And unfortunately, there's no perfect training routine or program where you can prioritize everything all at once.
And that's the hardest part. I think people try to do it all at once, and then inevitably your strong points get stronger, your weak points don't get attacked, and then you just stay in perpetual plateau city.
That's what I've seen countless times over and over again. And I think that if more people, and I was guilty of this too when I first started training, I wanted to prioritize everything all at once, and I felt like there was this magic training plan that I could figure out where everything gets worked equally. But the truth is, your body only has so much recovery ability. You only have so much time to train. You only have so much effort you could generate in a session. You're going to have to prioritize what you really want to grow. And there's nothing wrong with doing things in phases. If you want to grow everything and you want to develop everything, you can go through periods of time where you're focusing on your legs, another period of time where you're focusing on your arms. And the beauty of it is once you bring those body parts up, to maintain them doesn't take nearly as much energy, effort, and intensity that it was to grow them there. So spending time focusing on body parts, bringing them up, moving on to the next one. It's a slow process, and it takes much longer than most people think. But if you have the patience, that's where true balance and proportion comes in something like developing your whole physique.
Your longevity in bodybuilding is something that should be highlighted as being pretty awesome. Like I think sticking to something for a few decades, no matter what it is, deserves some kudos. With that sustainability, how has your training changed over the years to stay pain and injury free? Because you can't get big and strong if you got aches and pains.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the biggest things, which it was a bit difficult for me to kind of come to terms with, especially more recently, I'm 36 this year. So, I started training at 14. So I'm kind of like in this phase now where it's funny when I talk about kind of being a bit older of a lifter, I'm comparing myself to when I was 14 years old. And then I have older guys saying you're young, but I'm like, it's a little bit of a different ball game when you've been training hard since you're 14 and you're in your mid to late 30s now. Things are definitely different. But one of the most difficult things I think is, and I didn't really have this through my, mid or late 20s, but once I got into my 30s a little bit, you just naturally rack up a bit more wear and tear over time. I've always prided myself by training pretty safely. I've never done many things that I would consider like, high risk in the gym. I've always, steered on the side of caution because again, like you mentioned, it's a longevity thing. And I have aspirations of being able to do this as long as I can. I want to be training as hard and heavy as I can, whenever I can do that until. So I've always kept that in mind. But as I've kind of gotten to this age where you just naturally rack up more wear and tear just due to mileage on your body over time, I have to start being very specific with what exercises I can and can't do routinely. Because if they start racking up aches and pains, it's not like when I was younger, where if I got a little bit of shoulder tenderness or my elbow flared up. 2-3 days later, I'm back at it and it's fine. Now, if my knee hurts me from a very aggressive session, it could potentially affect me for a whole month, you know? So with that being said, my biggest thing is, number one, avoiding exercises that cause pain. At this stage of the game, there's only downsides to training through pain. You know, you can get away with things like that when you're younger. Not necessarily a good thing, but you can get away with it. At this stage of the game, that little benefit I might get out of doing a specific exercise that I enjoy more or that I see a lot of progress from, if it causes aches and pains, it's going to set me back further to the point where it's not worth it. And then at that point, I'd have to just use an alternative, or at the very least, which is something that I've been doing, my frequency on certain exercises that are a bit more high risk has gone down. So I'll still train those body parts the same frequency that I typically do, but a specific movement I might do less frequently. So if something like maybe a barbell squat's slightly aggravating to my knees, rather than barbell squatting every single week, that might be an every other week thing with an exercise in between that's a bit more, joint friendly. And that's changed over the years. There used to be a time when I would barbell squat 3 times per week, and that, while I was able to do it, I saw great results, but there was a point where if I keep doing this, my knees are not going to recover. And, I was able to get past that phase and still be able to train it. There's no exercise that I would say at this point I can't do, but there are exercises now where I have to be very careful with the frequency that I do them.
I love that advice of introducing smart variation. You could go from a squat with a barbell to doing a Hatfield squat to doing a leg press. It's still an overall squat pattern. You're getting the same stimulus to those muscle groups, but you're not beating up the connective tissues in the exact same way. And one thing that's helpful for me is tempo. Really, like it's if you're dive bombing that eccentric, bouncing out of the bottom, sure, it's great for pushing a lot of weight, but this is another example. If you're training legs twice a week, one of them, you could go really heavy and hard, max performance, get that bounce, do whatever it takes. Second one, slow eccentric, pause. It'll artificially constrain how much weight you can lift, but it'll still be challenging in a different way.
Absolutely. And this goes back to what we were discussing earlier as well. When we're talking about how hard we need to push and pull, it can even apply to something like this. We also, need to be self-aware enough to say not every session needs to have the same kind of intensity or fatigue. Some of these movements just cause much more fatigue than others. And there's other ways to train a muscle group while keeping the stimulus, maybe not as high, but high enough, while we're building in a bit more recovery as well. So having those exercise variations in there allows us to keep training the muscle groups that we want to train and still focus on that progression, but really keeping that recovery in check.
This is what I do enjoy about bodybuilding style training is you're not having to do that squat like a power lifter who's competing and they're going to trying to get that specific strength there. It's about keeping your body as healthy as possible for as long as you can, sticking to those basics. But if your body's sending these signals, you're not going to be meathead and just say, no, I'm going to push through this pain, even if it's like joint discomfort. That's when you tactically use variation and all these different strategies as well.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. There's always ways to work around things. And if you lock yourself into too small of a box there, and you force yourself to train through exercises that don't feel good, like I said, when you're younger, you might be able to get away with it. Just the more experienced you become, you start to realize that, you got to weigh out the pros and cons of doing things. And a lot of times there are plenty of ways to work around it while you're still getting all the benefits, but without the downsides.
Peter, I appreciate you leading from the front, man. I think you'll be saying the basics and screaming those for years to come. So will I.
Yes. I appreciate you having me on to share it as well.
Where can people follow your work or get coaching if they want to work with you?
Yeah, so if you want to check out more of my content, you can follow me on my YouTube channel. You just type in my name. It's Peter Kacharian. If you want to reach out to me via email, it's peter@oldschoolmassgain.com. And my website is oldschoolmassgain.com.
Awesome. Cheers, brother.